Some families don't fall apart when love runs out. They fall apart when the money does. This is the story of a veteran who spent 10 years holding her family together financially, until one birthday dinner showed her exactly what they thought of the child she was raising, and exactly what they thought of her. What she did that same night was quiet, deliberate, and completely final. Stay with me, because this one hits differently at the end.
The cake was already on the table when Vanessa opened her mouth and ruined everything. It was a Saturday in early October, one of those pale, cool afternoons where the light comes in sideways through diner windows and makes everything look softer than it actually is. Maple Junction Diner was the kind of place my dad had eaten lunch at for 30 years. The kind with laminated menus and a pie case by the register, and a waitress named Donna who remembered how he took his coffee. Black, no sugar, extra hot. He was turning 67 that day, and I had organized the whole thing. Made the reservation, ordered the cake in advance, drove 2 hours from Kansas City with Owen buckled into the back seat asking me every 45 minutes if we were almost there. I had paid for all of it before we even sat down. That part matters. Remember that part. Owen was 8 years old and had never been to a birthday party where someone actually ordered a whole cake just for one person. He kept twisting in his chair to look at it, sitting on the counter in its white bakery box, asking me in a low, reverent voice if the frosting was the kind that was sweet or the kind that was too sweet. I told him it was the good kind. He accepted this with complete seriousness and went back to watching it like he was guarding it personally. Before I go any further, if this kind of story sounds familiar to you, if you have ever sat at a table and realized the people around you see you as a resource and not a person, stay with me. Because what happened next changed the course of my life. And I want you to see exactly how it happened. My dad sat at the head of the table in his good flannel shirt, the navy blue one my mom irons for occasions. My mom was next to him. Vanessa and her husband Martin were across from me. My dad had just turned 67 and looked every bit of it, tired around the eyes in the way that comes from decades of bending over engines in a garage, but he was smiling. He seemed genuinely happy. He was telling some story about a customer who had brought in a truck with a transmission held together with what he swore was a coat hanger and electrical tape, and people were laughing, and for about 20 minutes it was just a birthday lunch. Donna brought the cake out. Yes, that is a real cake. Yes, it is for your grandfather. No, we cannot eat it yet. My dad looked down at the cake and then over at Owen, and he smiled at him, a real smile. The kind that reaches a person's eyes. And that was when Vanessa said it. She did not lower her voice. She did not hesitate. She reached for her water glass and said perfectly casually, as if she were commenting on the weather, Owen doesn't deserve the cake. Save it for a real family. The table went quiet. I have played that moment back in my mind more times than I can count, and every single time I noticed the same things. I noticed that Donna had just turned away from the table and so she did not hear it. I noticed that Owen heard it because his face changed, that particular stillness that children get when they understand something is wrong but do not have the language for it yet. I noticed that my dad said nothing. He looked down at the fork in his hand and he said absolutely nothing. My mom put her hand over mine. She said quietly, "Let it go, Karen." I looked at her hand on mine. I looked at Owen's face. I looked at my dad, who was still looking at his fork. I want to be clear about something. I did not feel hot anger at that moment. I did not feel the kind of rage that makes your vision go red. What I felt was something colder than that and much more specific. It was the feeling of a door closing, quietly, with a small, definitive click. I took my hand out from under my mom's and I stood up. I said, "Then keep the cake and you pay for the dinner." I picked up my purse, I held out my hand to Owen, and we walked out of Maple Junction Diner together. Owen did not ask about the cake until we were in the parking lot. I told him we would get ice cream on the way home. He thought about this for a moment and then said, "Okay, ice cream is better anyway because you can pick the flavor." I agreed that this was true. I drove 2 hours back to Kansas City. Owen fell asleep somewhere around the 40-mile mark, his head tipped against the window. The highway was quiet. I kept the radio off. I want you to understand something about the years before that afternoon, because the cake and the silence did not happen in a vacuum. For a decade, I had been the person in my family who kept things running financially. 10 years in the Army as a logistics specialist, and most of what I sent home was not gratitude shaped. It was a direct deposit, it was bill payments, it was a $1,400 monthly transfer that my family had come to treat less like a gift and more like a utility. Like electricity. You do not thank the electricity, you just expect it to be on. When I adopted Owen in 2023, that number dropped to $450 a month. Not because I wanted to punish anyone, because I was now responsible for a child, and children cost money, and I was one person. The reaction from my family was not understanding. It was not even disappointment, exactly. It was something sharper than that. They said things like, "You have changed." They said things like, "We used to be able to count on you." They said these things as if I had broken a contract, as if somewhere in fine print I had agreed to fund their lives indefinitely. I had been letting those things slide for almost a year by the time we sat down at Maple Junction Diner. I told myself they were adjusting. I told myself they needed time. My mom needed time. My dad was older, his garage was slowing down, the stress was real, and I understood that. But I kept writing the checks. I kept logging into my bank account and moving money, month after month, even when my own grocery budget was tighter than I wanted it to be. That afternoon, walking out of the diner with Owen's hand in mine, I understood that they had not been adjusting. They had been waiting for me to come back in line, to apologize, to make it all smooth again. The only adjustment they were interested in was mine. When Owen was asleep and the highway was dark and I was 2 exits from home, I did not write it down. I did not need to. I knew every automatic payment I had set up. I knew every account number. I had spent 10 years managing logistics for the United States Army. I knew how to inventory things. I knew how to close out a line item. When I got home, I put Owen to bed. I made a cup of coffee, and I sat down at my kitchen table with my laptop open. I worked quietly for 41 minutes. By the time I was finished, my family's access to my finances was gone. All of it. The auto payments on my sister's credit card, the monthly transfer to my parents' account, the car insurance I had been quietly covering for Martin for 2 years, the recurring payment to the cell phone plan that had my mom's number on it. Gone. Every single one. I shut the laptop. I drank the rest of my coffee. I washed the mug and set it in the dish rack and went to bed. I slept 7 hours straight, which was the best sleep I had gotten in months. In the morning, I made Owen scrambled eggs and toast, and we talked about whether sharks dream, which was a question he had developed a serious interest in that week. My phone was already buzzing on the counter. I turned it face down. At 7:42 in the morning, while Owen was explaining his theory about what sharks might dream about, a text came in from a number I recognized as my younger brother Daniel's. It just said, "You need to see this." Attached was a screenshot. I set down my coffee cup and picked up the phone. I did not open it right away. I set the phone down next to my coffee cup and watched. He had moved on from shark dreams to the question of whether fish get bored, which was apparently a ray in the small mental folder I kept of the find. He seemed satisfied with this. He carried his plate to the sink without being asked, which was something we had been working on for 2 months, and I noticed it, and I filed it away in the small mental folder I kept of Owen's quiet victories. Then I picked up the phone and opened the screenshot. But before I tell you what was in it, I need to back up. Because you cannot understand what that image meant without understanding what came before it. And what came before it was 10 years of my life, denominated in direct deposits and late night phone calls and a particular kind of exhaustion that does not show up on any medical chart. It turned out I was good at it. Not just competent. Actually good, the kind of good that gets noticed and rewarded with more responsibility and longer hours and assignments that other people quietly tried to avoid. The Army paid me a steady salary, housing allowance, and benefits. It was not wealthy by any civilian measure, but compared to where my family was in Springfield, it was stable in a way they had never quite managed. My dad ran a small garage that had good years and bad years, and the bad years had been more frequent since his knees started going. My mom did not work outside the house. Vanessa had been cycling through part-time jobs for most of her adult life. My mom called me and cried a little and said she did not know what they would do without me. I remember feeling proud of that. Proud in the uncomplicated way you feel when you are young and generous and you have not yet learned to read the fine print on gratitude. By the time I was 26, the transfers had become monthly. By 28, they had settled into a rhythm of approximately $1,400 a month, more in hard months, never less. My family did not ask where it came from specifically or how much I had left over after sending it. They asked when it was coming, and whether it could come a few days earlier if possible, and once in a while whether there was any chance it could be a little more. I told myself all of this was true. None of it was wrong to consider. What I did not let myself consider was the question of what would happen if I stopped. The phone call I remember most clearly happened on a Tuesday night in February. I was 30 years old and stationed at Fort Leavenworth by then, and it was 11:57 at night by the clock on my nightstand when my phone lit up with Vanessa's name. I answered it because I always answered it, even at 11:57 on a Tuesday in February. She was not crying exactly. She had that voice she got, tight and a little clipped, where she was working hard to sound like she was not panicking. She told me her credit card had been declined at the grocery. She had 3 days until Martin's next paycheck, and she had $60 in checking, and the kids needed lunch food for school. I lay in my bunk and looked at the ceiling, and I asked her how much she needed. She said $200, maybe $250 to be safe. I got up and went to the bathroom for privacy, and I opened my banking app and I transferred $250 at 12 o'clock in the morning. I heard her exhale on the other end of the line. She said, "Thank you, Karen. I do not know what we would do." I said it was fine. She said she would pay me back, which was something she said fairly regularly and had done twice in 10 years. I went. It was just the one that stayed with me most, maybe because of the hour, or because I had been tired that week in a deep way, or because I was 30 years old and lying on a bunk in a government bathroom at midnight transferring grocery money, and something about that felt like it deserved at least a moment of acknowledgement. I gave it about 4 minutes and then I went to sleep. In 2022, I was discharged after 10 years of service. I moved to Kansas City, took a job managing warehouse operations for a regional retail logistics company, and started building something that looked, for the first time in my adult life, like an actual personal life. An apartment I chose, a couch. I will tell you more about how that happened and why it mattered and who Owen's parents were, because that part of the story deserves its own space. But the immediate fact is this: in the same month Owen moved in, I adjusted the monthly transfer to my family down to $450. I sent my mom a message explaining the change. I was clear about the reason. I am raising a child now. My expenses had increased significantly. $450 was still something real, still money I was choosing to send. My mom replied within the hour. She said she understood that of course family comes first, that they would manage. I believed her. 2 weeks later, Vanessa called me and said, "I feel like you have changed." I told her my situation had changed. She said, "We used to be able to count on you." I did not say anything for a moment. Then I told her she could still count on me, that $450 a month was not nothing. She said, "It is not the same, Karen." She was right, it was not the same. But the way she said it, flat and a little cold, like I had broken a rule everyone knew about but nobody had ever written down, that was when I first felt it. The thing I had been too busy or too loyal or too tired to feel before. The particular chill of realizing that what your family calls love has a very specific price tag attached to it, and you have just gone slightly under asking. Over the following months, I watched the shift happen in real time. My dad's phone calls got shorter. My mom started every conversation with some version of things that are hard right now. Vanessa found reasons to bring up expenses in every interaction: the transmission on her car, the kids' school fees, the water heater that was on its last legs. Martin sent me a text once, unprompted, that said just, "It would be nice if things could go back to how they were." I picked up the phone. I opened Daniel's message. I looked at the screenshot he had sent me at 7:42 in the morning, and I understood, in the space of about 30 seconds, that there was no adjustment period. There had never been one. I need to tell you about Elliot and Paige before I tell you what was in that screenshot. Not because it is a detour, because without them, none of the rest of this makes sense. Without them, Owen is just a child who complicated my finances. And that framing, the one my family had quietly adopted, is exactly the thing I need you to understand is wrong. I met Elliot Graves at Fort Campbell in the spring of my second year of service. He was an infantry sergeant, the kind of soldier who took up a specific kind of space in a room, not loud, not showy, but grounded in a way that made other people around him feel steadier without quite knowing why. He was from a small town in eastern Tennessee. He drank his coffee with one sugar, and he had a particular habit of checking that the people around him had eaten something before any long briefing or movement. Just quietly, no announcement. He would show up with a granola bar or a sandwich and set it next to you without comment. I noticed this early and respected it. I met Paige Holloway about 4 months later. She was a combat medic, sharp and fast in the way that by the time I was 26, they with a grace together, and the world outside the wire feels very far away. Slowly at first, then all at once. By the time I was 26, they were married in a small ceremony at a county courthouse in Tennessee, with a handful of people present and a cake from a grocery store bakery that Paige described as honestly pretty good, all things considered. I was one of the handful of people present. Owen was born in the spring of 2015. I was 27 and stationed at Fort Leavenworth by then, but I drove down to Kansas City where Paige had been staying near her sister during the final months of her pregnancy. I got there the day after he was born, which was as fast as I could manage. Paige was in the hospital bed looking like she had been through something. She handed Owen to me before I had fully gotten my coat off. I had held babies before, not many, but some. None of it had prepared me for the specific weight of him, the way he was warm all the way through, the way he made a small indignant sound when the transfer happened, and then subsided into a kind of grudging tolerance of the new arrangement. His eyes were that unfocused newborn blue that all babies start with. His hands were extremely small. I stood there in the doorway of that hospital room holding Elliot and Paige's son, and I did not say anything for a while because there was nothing adequate to say. Paige watched me from the bed. She had that look she sometimes got, assessing and quiet and more, will you? She did not say it like a question exactly. She said it like a thing she already knew the answer to, but needed to hear out loud. I looked at her. I looked at Owen's face. I said, nothing is going to happen. She said, Karen. I said, yes, I promise. She nodded once and reached out to take Owen back, and the conversation moved on to other things, lighter things, whether Owen looked more like Elliot or more like Paige, a debate that was already underway and would not be settled for years. I did not think about that conversation again for a long time. You do not when the person who asked the question is still alive and sitting in front of you. Elliot deployed to Afghanistan in early 2018. This was not unusual. He had deployed before. Paige had deployed before. They were both career military, and they understood the shape of that life in a way that civilians find difficult to fully grasp from the outside. Owen was 2 years old, staying with Paige's sister in Kansas City while Paige finished out her own assignment. Elliot was killed in 2019. I will not describe it in detail, because the detail does not. What I can tell you is that it happened in the late afternoon during a routine logistics movement that became something other than routine. He was 34 years old. He had been in the Army for 12 years. He had a son who was 4, and who still called him Daddy in the present tense for almost a year afterward because no one really knew how to explain the past tense to a 4-year-old in a way that stayed. I drove down to Kansas City when I heard. I sat with Paige in her sister's kitchen for 2 days. There is not much else to say about those 2 days except that they were very long and very quiet. After that, Paige kept going, which was the only thing she knew how to do. She got out of the Army in late. She built a small life. She called me regularly, and we talked the way old friends do, about ordinary things mostly, Owen's school and my job, and whether the city had finally fixed the road construction on the stretch of highway we both hated. Owen was 6 years old and in first grade when Paige was killed in a car accident outside Kansas City in the fall of 2021. It was a Tuesday morning. A truck ran a red light. She was 32 years old. Owen was not in the car. He had stayed home that morning because of a low fever. Paige's sister was with him when I called. I sat in my apartment in Kansas City after I got off the phone, and I did not move for a long time. I thought about the hospital room. I had about Owen's weight in my arms, that warm, grudging, newly arrived weight. I thought about Paige's voice saying his name without a question mark at the end. I was the godmother of record. Paige had made that legal and formal and documented years before, with the thoroughness of someone who had spent a career in the military and understood that paperwork was not pessimism, it was preparation. I was already listed. The process still took time, because processes always take time, but the outcome was never in doubt. Owen came to live with me in the summer of 2023. He was 8 years old, small for his age, serious in the way that children are when they have already learned that the world can take things from you. I was the last person standing who had promised Elliot and Paige that their son would not grow up alone. I did not think of it as a burden. I did not think of it as a sacrifice. I thought of it as a fact, the same way the address on my lease was a fact, or the balance in my checking account was a fact. Owen was mine to take care of. That was simply true. What I had not fully accounted for, what I had perhaps been too tired or too focused on the immediate work of it to examine closely enough, was how my family would receive this fact. I was about to find out exactly what they thought of it. In writing, in a group chat called Family Planning that I had never been invited to join. I looked at the screenshot again. I read every line of it. The first time I brought Owen to Springfield, he wore his good sneakers. He had 2 pairs, one for school and one for what he called regular, which meant anything involving dirt or the park or activities he described as probably going to get messy. The morning I told him we were going to meet my family, he disappeared into his room for 4 minutes and came back with the school pair on, laces double knotted the way I had taught him. He did not explain this decision. He just stood by the door with his backpack and waited. I noticed. I did not say anything. I just grabbed my keys. This was September of 2023, about 6 weeks after Owen had officially moved in with me. I had been putting off the Springfield visit for most of those 6 weeks, which I was aware of and which I told myself was logistical. We were still getting settled. Owen needed routine before disruption. The timing was not right. These were all true things that also happened to be convenient. The real reason was simpler and less flattering. I was not sure how my family was going to behave, and I did not know yet how to protect Owen from behavior I could not fully predict. In the end, I drove us down on a Saturday in late September because my mom. The drive was about 2 hours. Owen spent the first hour looking out the window and asking me periodic questions about the landscape. Why the fields looked like that, what they were growing, whether cows could tell the difference between different kinds of grass. I answered everything I knew and admitted everything I did not. He seemed to find this acceptable. In the second hour, he got quiet. Not the comfortable quiet of someone relaxed, but the careful quiet of someone thinking through a situation. He said, "Are they nice?" I said, "They are family." He considered this for a moment. Then he said, "That is not really the same thing." I looked at him in the rearview mirror. He was looking out the window again, his expression neutral, and I thought, for not the first time, that Owen Graves had a way of identifying the precise center of a thing and naming it without fanfare. I said, "They will be glad to meet you." He said okay and went back to watching the fields. My parents' house in Springfield was a 2-story wood frame house on a corner lot that my dad had lived in since before I was born. The garage was separate, a converted structure out back where he had run his repair business for decades, and you could usually tell how the monk was going financially by whether the bay doors were open or closed on a Saturday afternoon. When I pulled up, the doors were closed. My mom came out onto the. I had grown up watching it. She came down the porch steps and hugged me, and then crouched down to Owen's level. She said, "Well, look at you, aren't you something?" Owen stood very still and said hi, with the polite formality of someone who had been coached on manners and was applying them carefully. My dad came out a few minutes later, wiping his hands on a rag, and shook Owen's hand with the solemnity of someone greeting a small adult. Owen responded in kind. I appreciated this from my dad more than I expected to. Vanessa and Martin arrived 40 minutes later with their 2 kids in tow. Vanessa had the particular energy she carried. Their kids went immediately to the backyard. Owen stayed close to me for the first hour, not touching, just near, in the radius that children maintain when they are in a new environment and have not yet decided whether it is safe to expand their range. I watched him track the room. I watched him watch Vanessa. We were sitting at the kitchen table, my mom putting out plates of food she had been preparing since that morning, when Vanessa looked directly at Owen and said, "So where are your real parents?" Not unkindly, exactly. More in the tone of someone asking a logistical question, like which school do you go to, or how old are you? Just a thing she wanted, I said, calmly and immediately. His parents were both in the army with me. They passed away. Owen lives with me now. That is how it works. I said it the way you close a cabinet. Firmly, so it latches. Vanessa said, "Oh, right, I knew that." She had said it distractedly, already reaching for the bread. Martin made a sound that might have been acknowledged. My mom looked at her plate. Owen looked at me. I looked back at him. Something passed between us. One of those small wordless agreements that you develop with a child when you have been paying attention to each other long enough to communicate without language. I gave him a slight nod. He picked up his fork. The afternoon continued. My mom asked Owen what grade he was in, whether he liked Kansas City, what his favorite subject was. Owen answered all of it carefully. Third grade. Yes, science. He ate everything on his plate, which I knew he did because he had been taught that it was respectful to do so in someone else's home, and not because my mom, but underneath the pleasantness, running just below the surface of every conversation like a wire under carpet, was the other thing. I could feel it from the moment we sat down. My mom mentioned the water heater once, in passing, how old it was, and how they had been hoping to get through another winter without replacing it. She mentioned the property tax on the garage. Just a comment, really, just something she had been thinking about. She asked me how the new job was going and whether the pay was good, and I said yes, it was steady, and she nodded in a way that was not really a nod of satisfaction, but more a nod of calculation. Martin said to me at one point, while we were in the kitchen and the kids were outside, that things had been tight lately. He said it looking. He played with Vanessa's kids in the backyard for about 40 minutes in the middle, which seemed to go fine, no incidents, though I noticed he came back to check on my location twice during that period. When I told him it was time to go, he got his backpack without argument, put it on, and went to find my mom to say thank you for lunch. She hugged him briefly. He accepted this with the same still formality as before. We were on the porch, coats on, ready to go, when my mom touched my arm and pulled me slightly to the side. She said it quietly, not a whisper, but close. She said, "Can you still help with the bills?" Not like it was lovely to me, Owen. "Can you still help with the bills?" I looked at her for a moment. I thought about Owen's school shoes, double knotted. I thought about him tracking the room all afternoon, quiet and careful. I thought about the 41 minutes I had spent 2 weeks earlier building something that looked like a normal family visit and had turned out to be something else entirely. I told her I would look at what I could do. She patted my arm and said she appreciated it. In the car on the way home, somewhere around the 40-minute mark, Owen said, "They like that you send them money, don't they?" I kept my eyes on the road. I said, "Where did you get that idea?" He was quiet for a second. Then he said, "They kept talking about money stuff every time you were in the same room, but they didn't talk about it when I was around, so I think they were being polite about it, in front of me." I did not say anything for a moment. Then I said, "You are a very observant person, Owen." He said, "My mom used to say that too." We drove the rest of the way home without talking much, and I thought about what a child of 8 had clocked in 3 hours that I had been explaining away to myself for the better part of a year. That observation stayed with me for the rest of the drive and through most of the night. Not because it was new information exactly. Owen had simply said the quiet part out loud, the part I had been folding and refolding and tucking away for months, telling myself it was manageable, telling myself that people showed love imperfectly, and that financial stress made people say things they did not fully mean. Owen had spent 3 hours in my family's home and identified the central dynamic with the clear, uncluttered vision of a child who had no particular investment in being wrong about it. I filed that away, the way I filed everything. Neatly, labeled, accessible when needed. The birthday lunch happened 14 months. I have already told you what Vanessa said at the table. I have already told you about the drive home, Owen asleep against the window. The highway quiet. I have already told you about the 41 minutes at my kitchen table that night. But I want to tell you what those 41 minutes actually felt like from the inside. Because I think people imagine a moment like that as something hot, something driven by anger, by wanting to hurt back. It was not like that. Owen went to bed at 8:30, which was his regular school night time even though it was a Saturday, because routine was one of the things that helped him feel stable, and I had learned early that consistency was worth protecting even when it was inconvenient. I checked on him at 8:45. He was already asleep, face down with one arm hanging off the side of the mattress in the specific way he slept when he was genuinely tired and not just going through the motions of bedtime. I was not shaking. I want to be clear about that. My hands were entirely steady when I filled the kettle, when I measured the grounds, when I carried the mug to the table and opened my laptop. I was not crying. I was not running through speeches in my head or imagining confrontations. I was in the same mental state I entered when I was working through a complex logistics problem at the warehouse, or when I had been in the army and needed to account for a supply chain that had three variables moving at once. I was calm in the way that a room is calm after someone has made a decision. I opened my banking portal first. I had 3 accounts across 2 banks. A checking account I used. The process required me to call the bank's customer service line, which I did, holding for 11 minutes before a representative picked up. I explained calmly that I wanted to close my access to the joint account and transfer the remaining balance, which was $212, to my personal checking account. The representative asked me to confirm my identity. I confirmed it. She processed the request, I thanked her and ended the call. Then I opened the credit card management portal for the card I had added Vanessa to as an authorized user 4 years earlier, during a period when her own credit was too damaged to get approval for a card she needed for a work expense, or so she had explained it. I moved to the automatic payment scheduler. This was the part that took the most time, not because it was technically complicated, but because there were more items than I had consciously registered when I was setting them up one by one over the years. The monthly transfer to my parents' joint account, $1,400 originally, reduced to $450 since Owen moved in. I canceled the recurring transfer. The system asked me to confirm. I confirmed. The automatic payment on Martin's car insurance, which I had started covering 2.5 years earlier after he lost his job for 4 months, and Vanessa called me in a panic saying they were going to lose the vehicle. Martin had been reemployed for over the cell phone account that had my mom's line bundled into my plan. She had been on my plan for 6 years. I removed her line. The system indicated the change would take effect at the end of the current billing cycle, which gave her approximately 3 weeks of service before the line went inactive. The streaming service subscription I had shared with my parents' household, a small thing, $9 a month, almost nothing. I canceled the family sharing. The recurring transfer I had set up to cover a portion of the property tax on my dad's garage, which I had been contributing to quietly for the past 3 years, $200 quarterly, without anyone specifically asking me to. I know this because I had set my coffee down when I started, and when I picked it up again, it was cold, and I had made it at 9 o'clock by the clock on the microwave. By the time I was done, it was 9:44. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel particularly sad. I felt the way you feel after you've reorganized something that was disordered, a supply closet, a filing system, a budget that had grown too complex because you kept adding to it without ever evaluating whether any particular line item still made sense. I felt like I had done a necessary piece of administrative work that I had been putting off for longer than I should have. I washed the coffee mug. I set it in the dish rack. The phone started at 6:52 in the morning. I know the exact time because I had not yet turned off my alarm, which was set for 7, and my phone lit up on the nightstand at 6:52 with my mom's name on it. I watched it ring. I did not answer it. It rang 8 times and went to voicemail. At 6:56, it rang again. Same name. I watched it again. It rang 8 times. At 7:01, while my alarm was going off, and I was reaching to silence it, a call came in from Vanessa. I silenced the alarm and set the phone face down. By the time I had brushed my teeth and gone to check that Owen was awake, which he was, sitting up in bed already assembling a Lego structure with the focused energy of someone who had been awake for a while, my phone had registered 3 more calls. One from my mom, one from Vanessa, one from Martin, which surprised me slightly because Martin almost never called me directly. He preferred to communicate through Vanessa, who communicated through my mom, who communicated through me, a chain of transmission that I had always found inefficient but had never said so. I put the phone on the kitchen counter face down and made Owen's breakfast. He wanted scrambled eggs again. I did not touch it. After Owen left for the bus stop, I stood at the kitchen window with my second cup of coffee, and I thought about what I was not doing. I was not calling back. I was not composing explanations. I was not rehearsing how to make this easier for anyone. For the first time in a very long time, I was simply letting a thing be true without immediately rushing to manage everyone's feelings about it. The phone lit up one more time. Daniel's name. That one I picked up. He said, "You need to see this," and sent me the screenshot that had been sitting unopened on my phone for the past hour and a half. I set down my coffee and I looked at it. The screenshot was from a group chat. The name at the top of the screen was Family Planning. I registered that first, the name, and I almost laughed. Not from humor. From the particular absurdity of a group chat existing, named and organized and active, that included every member of my immediate family except me. Family planning. As though I were a budget line that required regular review. The conversation in the screenshot was dated the night of my dad's birthday lunch. The night I had been sitting at my kitchen table. While I was doing that, they were doing this. I will tell you what it said. My mom started it. She had sent the first message at 9:17 in the evening, which was about 25 minutes after I would have finished and closed my laptop. The message said, "She actually left. I cannot believe she made a scene like that on his birthday." Vanessa responded within 2 minutes. She said she has been like this since she took that kid in. Everything changed. Martin wrote, "Someone needs to talk some sense into her." My mom wrote, "I do not want to push her. She gets defensive." Vanessa wrote, "She is going to keep pulling back and blaming it on him. You watch." Then there was a gap of about 12 minutes. And then Vanessa wrote the line that I read 3 times to make sure I was reading it correctly. She wrote, "Honestly, maybe the kid would be better off back in the system." I stopped. I read it again. My mom did not respond to that one immediately. There was a 4-minute gap before she wrote, "I just want things to go back to how they were." Martin wrote, "If he wasn't around, Karen would go back to helping like before." That's just facts. My mom wrote, "We just need things to go back to normal." Vanessa wrote, "Exactly, normal. Before all this." There were a few more messages after that, shorter ones. My mom saying she was going to try calling Karen in the morning. Vanessa saying to give it a day, let her cool off. Martin said she would come around once she realized how much this was affecting everyone. The last message in the screenshot was from Daniel. He had apparently been in the group chat the entire time, reading but not responding, and at 11:49 at night he wrote one line. He wrote, "This is not okay," and then, based on the screenshot, he had left the group. Then he had sent the whole thing to me. I set the phone down on the counter. I stood in my kitchen and I looked at the wall for a moment. Outside, a neighbor's dog was barking at something down the street. A car passed. The refrigerator made the low hum it always made. I picked the phone back up and read the screenshot again from the top. The thing I noticed, the thing I kept coming back to, was the complete absence of Owen. He was not a child. He was not a kid with a name and a history and a stuffed bear on his shelf and a habit of asking questions about sharks. He was not the son of 2 people who had served their country and died before they should have. Instead, he was an obstacle, a variable that had been introduced into a system and had disrupted the expected output. The expected output being me sending money consistently without complication. Maybe the kid would be better off back in the system. I had spent enough time managing supply chains to understand what it meant when someone reduced a human being to a logistical inconvenience. It meant they had stopped seeing. I want to be careful here about what I say I felt, because I think people expect a moment like this to produce a specific kind of response. Rage, maybe, or devastation. Something that makes your knees go or your voice break. I have seen enough of those responses in my life to know what they look like, and what I felt standing in my kitchen reading that screenshot was not quite either of those things. It was cold, not numb. Cold is different from numbness. Numb is absent. Cold is a specific temperature. Cold is the feeling of something becoming entirely clear. I had been managing my family's discomfort for months. I had been explaining Owen to them, contextualizing him, softening the edges of the situation so they could absorb it gradually. I had been patient with my mom's sideways comments about bills. I had been tolerant of Martin's pointed observations. I had been giving Vanessa the benefit of the doubt so many times and for so long that the benefit of the doubt had become its own kind of debt I kept extending. And the whole time, in a group chat I had never been invited to join called Family Planning, they had been having the real conversation. The one where Owen was a problem to be solved. They did not hate Owen. Hating him would have required seeing him. What they felt toward him was something more impersonal than hate. He was the reason the money had changed, and the money was the relationship. And so removing the reason the money had changed was simply, in their logic, the reasonable thing to want. They were not cruel people in the way that requires planning or malice. They were people who had arranged their lives around a resource and had never been required to examine what that arrangement actually meant, because the resource had never failed before. When it changed, they did not ask themselves hard questions about whether the arrangement had been fair. They asked, that was the complete calculation. I sat down at the kitchen table. I thought about the day I had brought Owen to Springfield, his good sneakers double knotted. I thought about him sitting at my parents' kitchen table, careful and watchful, answering questions politely, saying the pot roast was very good. I thought about him in the backyard with Vanessa's kids, checking twice to make sure he could still see me through the window. I thought about what he had said in the car on the way home, the quiet, accurate observation about the money, and how I had told him he was very observant and he had said his mom used to say that too. His mom, Paige, who had handed him to me in a hospital, whether he was adjusting, whether losing two parents before the age of 8 had been hard, whether there was anything any of them could do to make him feel welcome in the only extended family he had access to. Not one. They had asked about Karen, about money, about normal, about before. There's a specific kind of grief that does not announce itself. It does not arrive with weight or drama. It arrives quietly, like a final piece of information that completes a picture you had been trying to read for a long time. You look at the completed picture and you feel not shock, but recognition. Of course, this is what it was. Of course. I felt that. I let myself feel it for a few minutes, sitting at the kitchen table with the phone in my hand and the Sunday morning light coming in through the kitchen window at a low angle. Then I put the phone face down on the table. Then I stood up and got out the pan for Owen's eggs, because he would be home from the neighbor's house where he had gone to play at 9 o'clock and he would be hungry, and that was something I could do something about. I counted 7 more before noon. I did not return any of them. I was not ready to talk, and I had learned somewhere in my 30s that not being ready to talk was a complete sentence. You did not owe anyone a conversation simply because they wanted to have one, but I knew the conversation was coming. What I had not anticipated was that Vanessa would not wait for me to be ready. 3 days after the birthday lunch, I got a text from a number I did not recognize at first, until I read the message and understood from the tone exactly who it was. It said, "We need to talk." I texted back one word. Okay. Not because I wanted to see her, because I understood that this particular conversation was going to happen regardless of what I wanted, and the only variable I controlled was whether it happened on my terms or hers. If she came to my apartment, Owen might be there. If she came to my workplace, that was a problem of a different kind entirely. So I told her where I would be on Thursday afternoon, a parking lot outside a grocery store 2 blocks from my apartment at 3:30, after Owen's school bus had already come and gone and he was settled at the neighbor's house where he went on the days I worked late. I chose a parking lot deliberately. Parking lots, there is no door to close, no room to storm out of, no furniture to put between yourself and someone who is upset. A parking lot is just pavement and open sky, and 2 people who have decided to say the things they have been not saying. Vanessa pulled in at 3:41. I was already there, leaning against the side of my car with my arms crossed, not from hostility but because it was a cool October afternoon and I had not brought a heavier jacket. She drove a silver sedan I did not recognize, which meant she had either traded in the one I had helped insure, or it was Martin's. She parked 3 spots down and walked toward me with the particular energy she brought to confrontations, fast and direct. No hello. No, how are you? We had apparently agreed to skip that part. I said, okay. She said, I mean it, Karen. Mom's phone is going to go dark next week. Dad needs the garage insurance. Martin's car payment is coming up. I said, I know. She said, so you will fix it. I said, I did not say that. I said, I know. She looked at me for a moment. A car pulled into the lot behind her and she waited until it passed before she spoke again. She said, what happened at the diner was a joke. I should not have said it that way, but it was not serious. You are taking one comment and blowing it into something it was not. I looked at her. I thought about how many times over the years I had accepted that framing. It was a joke. You are too sensitive. You always take things the wrong way. I had been accepting that framing for so long it had started to feel like my name. I said, I have something to show you. I took out my phone. I opened the screenshot Daniel had sent me. I turned the screen toward her and held it steady. She looked at it. I watched her face while she read. I had expected denial, or anger, or maybe the performance of hurt that she sometimes used when she felt cornered. What I saw instead was something flatter than any of those things. Her expression did not fall apart, it just went very still. She looked at the screen for about 15 seconds. Then she looked at me. She said, where did you get that? I said, it does not matter. She said it was a private conversation. People say things when they are frustrated. You are taking it out of context. I said, what context would make it acceptable to suggest that an 8-year-old child who lost both his parents would be better off in the foster system? She did not answer that directly. Instead, she shifted, the way she always shifted when a direct line of argument was not working, sideways, to something adjacent. She said, you have been pulling away from this family since you brought him home. You barely call. You cut the money without even talking to us about it. You just decided, unilaterally, that what we needed mattered less than what you wanted. I said, I reduced the amount I was sending because I was raising a child. She said, you did not even ask us how we felt about it. I looked at her. I genuinely looked at her. The way you look at something when you are trying to decide if you are seeing it accurately. I said, Vanessa, I was not required to ask you how you felt about how I spend my own money. Her jaw tightened. She said, it was not just your money. That money was part of how this family operated. You knew that. You knew it for years, and you never said it was a problem until this kid showed up. There it was. That kid, not Owen, not his name. That kid, I said, his name is Owen. She said, I know what his name is. I said, then use it. She looked away, toward the street, and when she looked back, her expression had shifted again. The flatness was gone. What replaced it was something more recognizable. The slightly glassy look she got when she was working herself toward emotional territory, building toward something that would require a response from me. She said, you are letting that kid ruin our family. I had been waiting for something like that. Not consciously, not planning for it specifically, but somewhere in the part of me that had been managing Vanessa's escalations for 33 years, I had known that when the practical arguments ran out, she would find a way to make it personal, to make it about damage, to position herself as the injured party in a situation she had helped create. I said no. She waited for more. There was no more. She said, no what? I said, no what? I said, no. I am not going to turn the payments back on. No. I am not going to add you back to the credit card. No, I am not going to continue paying for Martin's insurance or Mom's phone plan or the garage property tax. No. That is the whole answer. The word sat in the air between us. I had said no to my family before, small versions of it, negotiated versions. No, I cannot send quite that much this month. No, the timing is not great right now. Soft knows that were really just delays, pauses in the flow rather than actual stops. This was different. This was a complete sentence. This was a door I was closing and latching from my side. Vanessa stared at me. She said, you cannot be serious. I said, I am. She said, Mom is going to lose her phone. I said, your mom is 64 years old and your dad has a business. She can get her own phone plan. Vanessa said, the garage barely makes anything. I said, I know. I've been supplementing it for 3 years. I am done supplementing it. She said, because of him. I said, because of me. She made a sound that was not quite a laugh. She looked at the pavement, then back at me, and the thing I noticed about her face in that moment was that underneath the anger there was something else. Disorientation, maybe? The particular disorientation of someone who has been operating inside a system they believe was permanent and have just been informed it is not. She said, so this is it. You are just done. Just like that. I said, "It was not just like that. It was a long time coming and you know it." She said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "I drove 2 hours." I said, "I know. I am sorry you made the trip." She turned and walked back to her car. She did not slam the door when she got in, which surprised me slightly. She just pulled out of the spot and drove away, and I watched the silver sedan leave the parking lot and turn onto the street and disappear. I stood there for a minute. The parking lot was mostly empty. A cart had gotten loose from the corral near the store entrance and was drifting slowly across the pavement in the light wind. I thought about the word no, how short it was, how long it had taken me to say it like I meant it. I drove home. Owen was already back from the neighbor's house when I got there, sitting at the kitchen table with his homework spread out in front of him and a look of moderate suffering on his face that indicated math. He looked up when I came in. He said, "Can you help with fractions?" I said yes. "Let me put my jacket down." I hung up my jacket. I washed my hands. I sat down at the table across from him and looked at his worksheet. And for the next 40 minutes, fractions were the only thing that mattered. The fractions got easier over the following weeks. So did a lot of things. I want to tell you about the life I was actually building, because I think in stories like this one, the focus tends to stay on the conflict, on the phone calls and the confrontations, and the cold clarity of cutting things off. And what gets left out is the ordinary texture of what was growing on the other side of all that. November came. Owen learned to ride his bike without the training wheels he had quietly been embarrassed about since moving in, an achievement he accomplished on a Sunday afternoon in the parking lot of a nearby church, with a persistence that required 11 attempts and produced 2 scraped palms and an expression of pure, focused determination that reminded me, in a way that caught me off guard, of Elliot. He did not celebrate loudly when he finally stayed upright and pedaled a full loop without going down. He just rode to where I was standing, stopped and said, "Okay, I think I have it now," in the tone of someone filing a report. I said, "I think you do." He nodded and went back to practicing. I stood in that parking lot in the November. I left at go by 5 with Severs, a 704 of someone who had decided that being prepared was a form of control over, and was at the door by 7:45 with 2 minutes to spare. I left for the warehouse by 8:30. I was home by 5:30 most days, 6 on the days I had to stay for a late delivery coordination. On those days, Owen went to our neighbor Carol's apartment, a woman in her late 60s who had a cat Owen was deeply fond of and who fed him crackers and apple slices and let him watch whatever he wanted on her television, which he considered a significant perk. Carol had started calling him her honorary grandson sometime in October. Owen had received this designation with characteristics. He rehearsed them at dinner, he rehearsed them in the car, he rehearsed them, I suspected, lying in bed at night, because once when I had gone to check on him after a late evening, I had heard him say, "Evaporation rises into the atmosphere," in a quiet voice before I knocked. The performance was in the school gymnasium at 6 in the evening on a Thursday. I arrived 20 minutes early and found a seat in the middle section of the folding chairs that had been set up in rows facing the small stage. The gym smelled like floor wax, and the particular institutional warmth of a building full of people, and the low roar of parents and grandparents and siblings settling in around me, was one of those sounds that contains an entire world if you stop long enough to hear. I said, "That sounds like him." She smiled and turned to find her daughter in the lineup gathering at the side of the stage. Owen's teacher, a woman named Mrs. Calloway, who I had met twice at school and once at a parent-teacher conference in September, caught my eye from across the gymnasium and gave me a small wave. She had told me at the conference that Owen was one of the most careful listeners she had ever taught, that he absorbed things quietly and then produced them back with a precision that was unusual for his age. She had said it with the particular warmth of a teacher who genuinely means what she is saying. I had driven home from that conference and sat in my car in the parking garage for about 4 minutes before I went upstairs. When Owen's class came onto the stage, he delivered his 4 lines about the water cycle without a single stumble. His voice was clear and carried well. He looked at the audience instead of the floor, which I happened to know had required conscious effort because he had mentioned it during rehearsal. I have to remember to look up. It feels weird to look at everyone. I had told him looking up was the whole job. He had accepted this as a logistics principle and applied it. When it was over and the kids came off the stage and found their people in the crowd, Owen walked directly to me and stood next to me with his hands at his sides. He said, "I did not mess up." I said, "You did not mess up." He said, "I thought I might be on the 3rd line." I said, "You did not." He nodded once, and that was the entirety of his celebration. We stayed afterward for the cookies and juice that the school had set out on folding tables near the back wall, and for 45 minutes I stood in that gymnasium and talked to people. Sophie's mom introduced me to her husband. Mrs. Calloway came over and told Owen directly that she was proud of him, and he received this with a slightly flushed solemnity that I filed away in the folder of his quiet victories. A man I recognized from the bus stop, whose son was in the 4th grade, told me there was a good park 2 streets over that Owen and his son had apparently already discovered together, and asked if we wanted to come by some Saturday morning. I said yes. I meant it. Owen had changed that without either of us planning it. He had walked into Oak Ridge Elementary and made friends with Sophie and the 4th grader from the bus stop, and probably several others I had not yet heard about, and in doing so had built us both into the neighborhood in a way I had not managed on my own. I mentioned this to my supervisor, Lydia Hart, the following week. I had stopped by her office to drop off a scheduling report, and she had asked how things were going, the way she asked every few weeks, genuinely, not as a formality. Lydia was 55 and had worked in logistics management for nearly 2 decades and had a way of listening that made you feel like what you were saying was being properly received. I drove home that evening thinking about what she had said and about the gymnasium full of people who had waved at me, and about Owen rehearsing 4 lines about the water cycle in the dart because he wanted to get it right. I thought about the word building, the ongoing present tense of it, not built, not finished. Building, still, every day, one ordinary evening at a time. The calls from my mom had slowed to about once a week by then. I had not returned any of them. I knew that could not last indefinitely. I knew she would eventually find a way through that I could not sidestep or delay. I just had not expected her to lead with the one thing she knew I could not argue with. She called on a Tuesday evening in the first week of December. I knew it was coming. I had known for weeks that the silence could not hold indefinitely, that my mom was not the kind of person who accepted distance without eventually finding a way to cross it, and that when she finally called, she would not lead with anger the way Vanessa had. That was not her method. Her method was quieter and, if I am honest, more effective. She led with sadness. She led with the specific tone of a woman who had been carrying something heavy and had finally decided to set it down in front of you. Then I told Owen I needed to take a call, and I stepped into my bedroom and closed the door and sat on the edge of the bed and answered. She said, "Hi, sweetheart." 2 words. That was all it took for something in my chest to shift, because she had called me sweetheart since I was small, and the sound of it in her voice carried 33 years of history that no amount of clarity or cold calculation could fully flatten. I said, "Hi, Mom." She said, "I have been wanting to talk to you for a while." I said, "I know." There was a pause. I heard her exhale slowly on the other end, the particular exhale of someone organizing themselves before something difficult. Then she told me about Vanessa first. She said the credit card situation had gotten serious, that without my card, Vanessa had been using a high-interest account she had opened on her own, and the balance was climbing in a way that was starting to worry everyone. She said Martin had picked up extra shifts, but the timing was bad, something about a project that had been delayed, and the holidays were coming. She said Vanessa had not been sleeping well. She said it the way you say something you hope will land as an argument. I listened. I did not say anything yet. Then she moved to my dad. She said his knees had been worse this fall, that he had a follow-up appointment he had been putting off because of the cost, that the garage had had 3 slow months in the tiredness, the way he moved around the house at the end of the day. She said, "He misses you, Karen. He does not say it, but I know he does." I looked at the wall of my bedroom. Outside, I could hear Owen's chair scrape against the kitchen floor, the small domestic sound of him shifting his weight, probably reaching for his pencil. My mom said, "I miss you too." That is just the truth of it. I said, "I know, Mom." She said, "Why is this so hard?" "Why can we not figure this out?" I said, "I think we have different ideas about what figuring it out would look like." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You have cut us off completely, Karen. The phone, the payments, everything. Your dad's garage insurance, do you know what that costs out of pocket? Vanessa is drowning. And I am sitting here watching my family fall apart, and I do not understand what I did that was so wrong that you would do this to us." There it was. The frame I had been waiting for. what I did to them. I had rehearsed this conversation in my head many times over the previous weeks. Not rehearsing what to say exactly, more rehearsed how to stay steady while I said it, how to keep my voice even, how to not get pulled into the undertow of her grief, which was real, I believed it was real, and which also was not the whole story. I said, Mom, I need you to think about something. In the last 3 months, how many times has anyone in this family asked how Owen is doing? She was quiet. I said, not how I am doing, not whether I will turn the payments back on, how Owen is doing, whether he is adjusting, whether he is happy, whether there is anything anyone wants to do to make him feel like he has a family. She said, that is not fair. I said, I am not trying to be unfair. I am asking a genuine question. She said, we do not really know him, Karen. You have barely brought him around. I said, I brought him around in September. I brought him to Dad's birthday in October. Those were the 2 times I brought him around, and I will tell you exactly what happened both times if you want me to. She said the birthday was a misunderstanding. I said, Vanessa told an 8-year-old child that he did not deserve a birthday cake in front of a full table of people. In what context is that a misunderstanding? My mom said, Vanessa did not mean it the way it sounded. I said, Mom, I have a screenshot of a conversation where Vanessa suggested that Owen would be better off back in the foster system, because then things could go back to normal, because then the money would come back. I have it in writing. I have read it many times. I am not misinterpreting it. The silence that followed was long enough that I thought for a moment she might have put the phone down. Then she said, you are letting a stranger tear this family apart. I heard the words. I felt them land. And I made a decision, right there, sitting on the edge of my bed in the December dark, that I was not going to let that framing stand. Not this time. Not with her. I said, he is not a stranger. He is my son. And he is the son of 2 people who served this country and died before they were 40. And I made a promise to his mother when he was 1 day old that he would not grow up alone. So no, he is not a stranger. My mom said, Karen. I said, he is the reason I am still standing, Mom. Do you understand what I mean when I say that? The 2 years before Owen came to live with me, I was going through the motions. I was working and sending money home and existing, but I was not building anything. I did not have a reason to come home to my apartment and feel like it meant something. He gave me that. He is 8 years old and he gave me something I did not know I was missing. She did not say anything. I said, and I understand that is hard to hear. I understand that from where you are sitting, it looks like I chose him over you. But what I actually did was stop letting the people I love make choices for me about what my life should look like and who should be in it. My mom's voice, when it came, was smaller than it had been. She said, so this is it then. This is just how it is now. I knew what she was asking. She was asking whether the version of me that sent money every month, that smoothed things over, that absorbed Vanessa's cruelty and Martin's entitlement and came back anyway, whether that version was simply gone now, whether there was any road back to before. I thought about it before. I thought about it before. I thought about it honestly, without the soft focus that grief and loyalty tend to apply. I thought about what before had actually felt like from the inside. 12 years of being a utility, a wallet with a voice, a resource that was expected to be available and grateful for the opportunity to. I did not want to go back to before. I said, yes, Mom. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I do not know what to do with that. I said, I know. I am sorry that it hurts. I mean that. She said, but you are not going to change it. I said, no. Another long silence. I heard her breathing. I heard the faint sound of the television in the background, which meant my dad was in the living room, close enough to hear her side of the conversation if he was paying attention. She said, I hope you know what you are doing. I said, I think so. For the first time in a long time, I actually think so. She said goodbye in the quiet way she had when she was finished, not coldly, but finished. I said goodbye. I sat on the edge of my bed for a few minutes after the call ended, holding the phone in my lap, looking at the closed door of my bedroom. Then Owen knocked on it and said, through the door, I finished the homework. Give me 1 second. I set the phone on the nightstand. I breathed in. I breathed out. I opened the door. His fractions were right. All of them, every single problem on that worksheet, are correct. I checked twice because I wanted to be sure, and then I told him so, and the expression that crossed his face was not the loud pride of a child who wants celebration, but the quieter satisfaction of someone who has been working at something and has finally seen the work pay off. He nodded once, collected his papers, and went to put them in his backpack for the morning. This is October again. 1 full year since the birthday lunch at Maple Junction Diner. 1 full year since I walked out with Owen's hand in mine and sat in the parking lot and let something finally close. I want to tell you where things stand now, because I think stories like this one owe you the honest version of the ending. Not the clean one, not the version where everything resolves into perfect clarity and everyone learns their lesson and the credits roll. The honest version is quieter than that and, I think, more true. My dad's garage is still open. I know this because Daniel mentions it occasionally in the texts we exchange, which are more frequent now than they were a year ago. Daniel and I are not close in the way that some siblings. My dad's knees are worse. I heard this through Daniel too. He had the appointment he had been putting off finally, and the news was not great. Cortisone injections and a recommendation to reduce the hours he spends on his feet. I heard this and I held it. The way you hold something that hurts, but is not yours to fix anymore. I hope he rests. I genuinely hope that. Vanessa is still managing the debt. I do not know the specifics, and I have stopped trying to. Martin is working. Their kids are fine, as far as I know. The version of my family's life that I used to subsidize is continuing without my subsidy, which means it was always more possible than they let on. It means the emergency was never quite as total as it was presented to me. I do not say this with bitterness. I say it the way you note a fact that has finally been confirmed by evidence. My mom and I have spoken twice in the past year. Both times were brief, careful, like two people walking on a surface they are not certain will hold. She is not warm the way she used to be, or maybe the warmth she used to show me was always conditional in ways I could not see until the condition was removed. I do not know. I think about that sometimes. Real or not, I have to move forward from where I am, not from where I wish things had been. What I know for certain is this. In January of this year, I opened a college savings account for Owen. I set up a monthly automatic transfer into it, the exact same amount I used to send to my family every month. $450. Every month on the 1st, it moves from my checking account into Owen Graves' future. I do not think about it as a redirect exactly. I think about it as a correction. A finally accurate allocation of a resource that had been misrouted for years. Owen does not know the specific number. What he knows is for what every month is name on it that grows a little every month, and that I told him it is for whatever he decides he wants to do with the same on it that grows little ever he decides he wants to do when he is older. College, trade school, a gap year if he needs to think. Whatever shape his future takes, he received this information with the same thoughtful seriousness he brings to most things, and then asked if it could also be used for marine biology school specifically, because he had been doing research. I told him that marine biology school was absolutely a viable option. He seemed satisfied with this and went back to his book. The question he asked me that I want to tell you about happened on a Sunday morning in September, about a month ago. We were at the park, the fourth grader from the bus stop, whose name turned. Then he said, "Can I ask you something?" I said, "Always." He looked at the ground, he picked up a small stick and turned it in his hands. He said, "Why don't the youngs like me?" I had known this question was coming for a long time. I had thought about how I would answer it more times than I could count. In the car, lying awake at 2 in the morning, in the shower, in the particular mental space where you rehearse the things that matter. I had drafted answers that were gentle, and answers that were age-appropriate, and answers that protected him from things a 9-year-old did not need to carry. But sitting next to him on that bench, watching him turn that stick in his hands with the careful patience of a child who has already learned to wait for the world to tend. And when you came to live with me, the picture changed. And instead of finding a way to make room for the new picture, they decided the new picture was the problem. He thought about this. He said, "So it was about money." I almost smiled. I said, "It was about what they thought family was for, and they got it wrong." He said, "What is family for?" I looked at him, 9 years old, waiting for an answer with the same quiet focus he had brought to 4 lines about the water cycle in a school gymnasium almost a year ago. I said, "Family is for showing up. For the ordinary days, not just the important ones. for checking if someone ate something, for sitting on a bench at a park on a Sunday, for making sure a person knows they are not alone in the world. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That's what you do." I said, "That is what I try to do." He nodded slowly. He dropped the stick. He leaned against my arm for a brief moment, which for Owen was the equivalent of a long and elaborate declaration of affection. And then he stood up and said Marcus was probably done with lunch by now, and could they stay another hour? I said yes. We stayed another hour. On the drive home, he told me 3 facts about bioluminescence that he had memorized during the week, and I listened to all of them, and when we got home, I made grilled cheese and he set the table without being asked, and we ate lunch together in the apartment that belonged to both of us now, that had his drawings on the refrigerator and his Lego structures on the shelf and his good sneakers by the door. Paige had asked me not to let him grow up alone. I have turned that over in my mind many times since she said it. I think she is right. I think the building is hard and slow and made of ordinary days stacked on top of each other, fractions checked at the kitchen table, bike loops in a church parking lot, 4 lines about the water cycle delivered without stumbling. I think that is what it is. I think that is all it needs to be. If you have ever been told you were too much or not enough for your own family, remember this. Silence can be power, and truth can be the loudest revenge. Tell me in the comments what integrity means to you and where you are listening from. And if this story stayed with you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today.